Welcome! I'm Johan Nilsson.
And I'm Lincoln Murphy. And this is Impact Weekly.
We're here to help you make your customers successful. Each week, we answer your most pressing customer success management questions by relying on our years of experience with companies around the world.
Let's get this going. Welcome back. It's time for Impact Weekly. Let's get this going. This is the question. It's a really good one. As the new head of customer success, what should I consider when allocating customers to my CSMs? Super question.
Okay. Yeah.
This is a topic that's too little discussed, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's discussed nearly enough. And I think the result of that is what you see out there, which is a lot of just random customer allocation. Just a CSM has a book of business or a portfolio with just random customers in it. Maybe that equals a certain amount of revenue, but in terms of the customer characteristics and things that we'll discuss in a minute, like it's random. And I think that's a result of this not being something that people talk about very much. So
Alphabetic order, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have all the A and B customers.
There you go. That is probably not optimal, but yeah. No. So this is a great question. I think we have some interesting context that we can provide here.
Definitely. Yeah. And we know there's also this where you just divide the ARR in equal bits between your CSMs or the number of customers. And yeah, but that's still quite random, right?
Yeah. Historically with customer success management, everything we do is based around what the customer pays. And that really everything is based around that, and including generally customer allocation. And that's suboptimal. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. I think if we just started with, like you said, zoom out, take a step back.
Yeah.
What's the point of allocating customers to CSMs? Or rather, what should be the point? What should we be thinking about here? And the way that I see it is we need to make sure we're putting the right people in the right place to ensure the customer and the CSM thrive.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that very simple statement that we'll unpack here, but it's ultimately about making everybody successful here. The customer, of course, but also the CSM.
Yeah, it's not like a math problem, right? It's not, hi, I have 500 customers. I can divide them to 5 CSMs, or I have the goal here is, as you say, it's to really ensure that the customer thrives. And to make that happen, of course, we need to make sure that the customer success manager thrives in the role as well.
Yeah. So not to spend too much time on the history of customer success management, but I think it is good to know why we do some of the things that we do or where they came from. And this idea of what's still called in some cases a book of business or a portfolio of customers or whatever, that really stems from the early days of customer success management, which was a carryover from just traditional account management. And look, in the olden days, when account management was simply checking in with a customer, making sure that they were going to pay their bills, seeing if they had any questions, but that was the extent of it. You could just have a list of customers. Didn't really matter the size of those customers. Didn't really matter what success looked like for them. You weren't really helping them be successful. You were just checking in, and that was fine. But once we understood that customer success management is actually helping the customer be successful, and that looks very different from one customer to another. And it looks different even across various lifecycle stages. So what that's actually going to take to ensure that they are successful, that there's a different level, there's different number of person hours required for one type of customer versus another. All of a sudden, this idea of just X number of customers per CSM or X amount of revenue per CSM, like that just breaks down because it doesn't take into consideration the actual reality of ensuring that customers are getting what they perceive to be success from their relationship with us. And that's a it's good to understand where we came from and why this is still a dilemma.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's exactly why this question is super relevant to dig into today. Sometimes I think also using this traditional way to just delegating, or it's almost like if you're a head of CS, you're responsible for the whole customer base and you're delegating out these customers to the CSM, and then you've done your work here. Of course, that's a little bit exaggerating, but I think sometimes we need to revisit this. Why are we doing this, and what are we trying to get out of it? Because in the end of the day, we know there's a lot of problems. I think we maybe should bring up what are the issues when you do it this more random allocation.
Sure. Yeah. So some of the common problems that you see is CSMs that are either under or over capacity. I've had situations where one CSM was at about 25% capacity, or I've seen it where, and this is actually much more common, but I've seen it where CSMs are working with 3 times as many customers as they should be if they were to deliver the customer's appropriate experience. The one where the CSMs were working with 25% capacity, they actually this was crazy. These CSMs had second jobs that they had enough time that they were able to, yeah. But in the same company, other CSMs were at 300% capacity. So this random allocation of customers just had some CSMs burning out and some CSMs having enough time for second jobs. Like, it was wild. And that's a very real thing. So just not understanding how capacity figures into this, you have a suboptimal situation here that's ultimately going to impact your key metrics and your KPI, like NRR and retention and expansion and all of that stuff that's going to figure into it. So this really does have a detrimental effect to just all of the things that matter to you in customer success.
And as maybe some of you listeners have already received, we are doing a big study right now where we are surveying the customer success community, and we're getting a lot of answers, and a few questions are around capacity, and it's devastating results in terms of how many have too many allocated customers, so they're way under capacity as they are working right now.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that all plays out. Anecdotally, just in my experience, so when we run capacity planning models, what is not rare is literally CSMs being at 200% capacity or more. That happens just almost every time we run this. We're far exceeding 100% capacity. What that means is our CSMs are working with far more customers than they could ever successfully deliver an appropriate experience to. So something's got to give in that scenario, right? And that's usually, you're going to see that in the metrics that matter to us, and you're going to see that in burnout and turnover in your CSMs. Yeah. So this is really important for both customer and employee success, that you get this as close to right as possible.
Yeah, and I think even it's not about being hardcore and having a lot of customers on one CSM. You're tricking yourself there. As you say, something has to give, and it's going to be either one of your team members quitting due to burnout, or you're not realizing the potential you have in your customer base, basically. So there's some big things here to improve.
Exactly. Yeah. I think what's interesting is when there is turnover, when a CSM does leave, now you have to allocate those customers.
Oh yeah.
And now you've just added to the workload of the CSMs that are still there. And it's a vicious cycle. We have to break out of it. And just one other thing on why that burnout happens. And this is something that we don't think about very much, and we really need to. So again, we want to make sure that we're putting our CSMs in a position to thrive.
Yes.
And we also need to make sure the customers are in a position to be successful. So we have to understand what it's going to take to make the customer successful, and then put those customers with the right internal resources. So with the right CSM, that's going to be able to help them be successful. What we see with this random distribution of customers within one CSM's portfolio is that customer success manager is going to have to switch from working with different types of customers throughout the day. And that could be customers with different appropriate experiences, customers in different industries, customers at different maturity levels,
Yes.
customers at different complexity levels, and probably many more things that you need to take into consideration there.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you have to switch between working with those different types of customers, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It just has a mental overhead associated with it that we don't take into consideration very much. But that's the thing that can really lead CSMs to burnout. And aside from just being over capacity, it's that code switching from one type of customer to another that just takes its toll. And so if we can be more deliberate, more thoughtful about where a customer is going to go, like this customer has this appropriate experience, or they have this maturity level, I'm going to put them with this CSM because this CSM works better with customers that match these dimensions. Like you said, all of a sudden we're positioning everybody to be successful in that scenario. That's just something that doesn't happen outside of world-class companies who understand this, but unfortunately still in a lot of customer success management organizations, this is not the way that they think, but hopefully that will start to change.
Yeah. No, this is huge. We could pay a lot more attention to more things when we do this allocation, because it's going to be what people put their focus on, right? These will be their customers, and they will spend a lot of time with them. So spend a little bit more time before allocating and looking into with which customer. I think this is where we could invest some time to get a lot more leverage, basically.
Totally. Yeah. Like you said, it's not just a math problem. It's not just here, a customer comes in and we round robin it, or we base it on some sort of math problem. It's just, that's not the right way to do it. Hopefully this gets people thinking in that direction.
Exactly. And I think also we should touch on this. It's related to the question here, but as a head of customer success, you will be facing a scenario where a CSM quits and you need to reallocate customers. But so switching, I think we should touch on that as well, because that's also something that heads of customer success are sometimes reluctant to do, or sometimes they do too much. Or how should we deal with switching customers between customer success managers?
Before we started recording, you were talking about something that I think is really important, and that's not making this such a big deal.
I believe there's a lot to be gained actually by having multiple people looking after the customer. And I think sometimes we in customer success, we make too big of a deal when we switch a customer success manager. And I think that actually hurts more than it helps. Hello, I'm the new CSM. My name is Bill. Can we set up a call together here or whatever? We make a big deal out of us being the new customer success manager. Whereas from a customer's perspective, do they really care that much who it is? They are looking to get a result. They're looking to do whatever they want to do with you and your company and your product. Of course, there's a relationship here and so on, but I think we overestimate sometimes the importance of ourselves here, and that gets in our way, actually.
Yeah, and whenever we talk about things like this, it can sound like we're diminishing the CSM or their relationship with the customer, and that's not it at all. We just have to be realistic. From the customer's point of view, I say this about the product. Your product is not the most important thing in the world to the customer. They're trying to get a result. Well, in that same way, you as the CSM are not the most important thing in your customer's life. What's really important to them is just getting the result that they're looking for, getting their desired outcome met, their goal plus their appropriate experience. And if we keep that in mind, it just makes sure that we're putting the focus in the right place. Again, not to diminish or anything what your role is in this, but we just have to be realistic. Yeah, if it makes sense for them to work with somebody else, then we just make that transition and do it with as little fanfare as possible. It should really be a non-event.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Very often, either overtly or by mistake, but sometimes it's been something that's actually been said, which is you as the customer are going to work with this CSM forever. Like this is your CSM for life, which just doesn't make any sense just from a human factor. if the CSM is a human, there's always the chance that the customer might be working with someone else at some point down the road. So just make sure you're not positioning your CSMs, if you're head of customer success, or you as the CSM, make sure that you're not positioning yourself as like the only person the customer will ever work with. If we've done that, any sort of switching that just adds a layer of complexity or whatever that you have to work past now because you've mismanaged expectations. If you've done that in the past, fine. Draw that line in the sand right now, though, and say any new customers that come in, you're going to properly manage expectations that I'm your CSM and I'll be working with you. If there's ever a point where I'm not able to work with you or we need some things changed, you will work with an equally or even more skilled person than me. Just say that and move on.
Yeah.
And now you've managed expectations. So I think that's really important to understand, that we can't mismanage those expectations. And from there, there's absolutely no reason to not move the customer around if it makes sense. Now, remember though, customers really hate repeating themselves. They also hate surprises and unknowns, and changing CSMs has the potential to invoke all three of those things.
Yeah.
But probably the most important one here to think about is the repeating themselves. You mentioned, hi, I'm your new CSM, Bill. Can we schedule 15 minutes to sync on your account so that I can understand what's going on with you? That's not an email that a customer wants to receive. But if Bill just stepped in and took over, and it was clear that Bill knew what was going on because we're working off of centralized customer data and even some non-structured data turnover of context from the CSM that they were previously working with, if applicable, then now the customer is working with somebody that they don't have to bring up to speed. They don't have to repeat themselves. All right, cool. Let's move on. But it's when you have to repeat yourself that the customers really don't like working with multiple people. It's not the multiple people.
Exactly.
It's the repeating themselves.
Yeah. And I think in that case, that's going to be really smooth. And even if the old CSM still is in the picture, maybe he's in the first couple of calls or emails and so on, it's not going to be a big event at all. And then it's even, as you said in the beginning, if you have a great working relationship and you're doing great work together with the customer, there's no reason to switch, of course. But I would say that's in most cases, you have a lot of customers that you probably maybe need to switch, and there's not that type of history. And in that case, you should not do it it shouldn't not be a big thing, basically. I think that's the main point here.
Yeah. And there's customers that you're going to have a really great relationship with that maybe you just there's no reason to switch. There's customers that are in a fragile state that maybe we don't want to switch them right now because just for whatever reason. But then there's going to be that cohort of customers that could totally be reallocated if it makes sense from a capacity standpoint or from an appropriate experience standpoint. I would, as head of customer success, have your CSMs go through and just label their customers. Like, which ones do you have a great relationship with, and which ones are fragile right now? And then which ones do you think it wouldn't be harmful and would actually potentially help?
Exactly.
If we could switch. So that's something to think about as head of customer success when working with existing customers. And then as new customers come in, just being thoughtful about, okay, here are the characteristics of this customer. Again, either their appropriate experience, their maturity level, whatever those factors are, or a combination of those factors. And based on that, I think they should go to this CSM because maybe they need a more consultative approach. And this CSM has that experience, maybe from a big consulting firm or something. And then, or they have domain expertise or whatever. Yeah. And then this other customer comes in, and they themselves have all the expertise and experience, and they don't really need as much of a consultative approach. They just need to make sure somebody's there when they need not technical support, but need support strategically and in order to achieve their business goals, but on their terms. So you would allocate that customer to a CSM that's better at more of an asynchronous engagement style, right? And so now we're starting to put people in places where they can thrive and put customers in with those people who will help them who can most help them be successful. So again, it's being thoughtful in this approach. And so you can start doing that now. Any new customers that come in, Be thoughtful about how you allocate them. Any customers that you need to switch. So if a CSM does leave and you have to reallocate their portfolio, be thoughtful about that. Don't just spread them out randomly or just equally split them across CSMs. You have an opportunity here to be thoughtful about with whom they should work in order for them to be successful.
Yeah. And we could spend a lot of time on it, but we should mention capacity planning here as well. Yes, because that fits into this as well.
It so does. So if we mentioned capacity planning, what does that really mean? Again, if we take a look at the various life cycle stages that the customer goes through, there are going to be, and we take into consideration the appropriate experience of the customer. Yeah. Essentially, that boils down to the content, channel, and cadence of engagement. For more synchronous engagement, that's going to be more heavily weighted towards one-on-one meetings. So there's going to be more person hours required for those types of customers. For what we might say is more of an async model, that's going to be fewer one-to-one meetings, more async video, like Loom videos or something, more deflection to self-service, that kind of thing. It doesn't mean you won't have any one-to-one engagement. It's just going to be more heavily weighted towards async. You're going to take those things into consideration and say, all right, across each life cycle stage, so onboarding, adoption, ongoing engagement, the various stages within that, how many person hours are required to deliver that customer's appropriate experience? And then you'll know how many customers a CSM can actually work with. It's not rocket science. There's a little bit of science involved, but this is just one of those things that outside of world-class companies who have realized that they need to be putting customers in the right place with CSMs that can really help them thrive and figuring out ways to do this at scale. This is not something that's talked about very often. It's what we teach in the Impact Academy in our Head of Customer Success program, because this really is what you need, how you need to be thinking about things. But yes, we have to understand the actual capacity of our CSMs. We have to understand what it's actually going to take in order to help the customer achieve their desired outcome across the entire customer lifecycle. We have to know how many customers are going to be in each lifecycle stage. So we have to sync with sales to make sure we understand how many customers are going to be coming into onboarding. This will also help you in terms of capacity planning, will help you figure out when you should carve out specialist roles. So if your CSMs are spending a lot of time with customers in onboarding and they're not able to spend as much time with their customers in the other stages of the life cycle, then we might want to carve out a role for onboarding specialists. So this is like, taking customer success management and looking at it in a way that I think historically it just hasn't been done, which is why you end up with some CSMs way over capacity, burning out, turning over, and then you have some CSMs that are far under capacity and can take on another job while they work for you too. So it's really critical stuff. Yes.
And I think also back to the question again, and actually, why do we want to allocate customers? It's the goal as head of customer success here is to make the customer success manager take ownership. And the only way you can make or get someone to feel ownership is that they can control the outcomes. And if you randomly allocate and you do that so they are overwhelmed in a capacity way, then they will not feel ownership and take ownership of that group of customers, that portfolio, that book of business. So what we're trying to achieve as head of customer success is to get the customer success manager to assume ownership here. And to do that, we need to have we can be thoughtful how we look at the customer base and allocate them, but we need to fit it. It needs to be able to fit it into their calendar. And that's where capacity planning comes in.
So that's just perfect. If you are over capacity and you're burning out your CSM, they're not going to just not feel ownership. They're going to not want to feel ownership, because you don't want to own something that is just failing or that is just so obviously not going to work out. A lot of movement with customer success managers from one company to another is absolutely traced back to what they would cite as burnout. And that burnout is absolutely traced back to overcapacity. And remember, people don't quit companies as much as people quit bosses. And so as a head of customer success, when your CSMs leave, it's going to be easy for you to try to find all of the reasons why they left that have nothing to do with you. But I would take a real long look in the mirror. Really, just look at how you're running your operation. And if you're not taking into consideration capacity planning, not taking into consideration the things we're talking about today, that is probably the reason you have a lot of turnover and a lot of burnout that leads to that turnover. And the great thing is it really doesn't have anything to do with you as a person or a professional. So the cool thing is you can change that. You can start applying these things. So that's what's great. So yes, they might quit you because of what you've done to date, but you can change that. You can become a better head of customer success. And if you really want to do that, you can just try to put into place what we talked about today, or you can come to our Impact Academy and learn all the details of how to do that. But either way, this is going to be your key to being a better head of customer success and having a team that doesn't want to quit, that they want. That's really where we want to be. So I think with all of that said, let's give three practical takeaways.
Yes. So to summarize, so the question is to repeat the question here. So as a new head of CS, what should I consider when allocating customers to my CSMs? And I think the number one thing here that we talked about is that the CSM, they need to really feel ownership for their customers. I think that's key here.
And I think the way you feel that ownership is with number 2 here, which is capacity planning. You have to make sure that you understand what it's going to take in order to help our customers actually achieve success, whatever that looks like to them. And so doing real capacity planning is going to be the key to that. And then number 3, building on that, is segmenting your customers, not by what they pay, but segmenting them by shared appropriate experience, creating coverage segments based on the customer's appropriate experience, because that is something that when you do that, you're going to be able to figure out which CSMs are the ones that can deliver the appropriate experience to your customer. And that's going to really help everybody be successful, your customers and the CSMs. So appropriate experience segmentation.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Over and out for today. Hey, thanks for listening. Do you want to bring your customer success to the next level? Check out Impact Academy. We have training programs for customer success managers and for leaders in customer success.